Hi, and I'm glad you joined us for Teaching the Necessities for Middle, High School English and Language Arts. I'm Katie, and I'm with Katie's Homeschool Cottage. That is my website, and I have a brand new one. Woohoo! It has a blog, a shop, and I am in the middle of developing self-paced and online live classes for middle and high school for literature, grammar, and writing. And I'll be going over some of the different things that homeschoolers should be looking at, including in their middle and high school English through their years, especially if they're planning on applying to college. Just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I have been homeschooling 13 years, and I've been in education almost 30. So I started out as a classroom teacher, and I then started training teachers in states across the Southeast. I also was a professional writer in the education field and an editor. So I try to bring in all of those years of experience into the teaching that I do, and also workshops that I have done and am doing with parents. I also, and have always, while I've been homeschooling, been teaching in co-ops. So I teach co-op classes, and right now I am teaching high school co-op classes in English. So I try to bring in everything that I've seen, tried out with my kids and also in my classes, and I try to take everything that works and apply it in my teaching. So I hope that during this workshop you'll find some interesting and some very helpful tips in what you might want to include in your teaching. So over on the right you can see there I am with my husband and my two kids. That's a few years ago. I have one now who's going to be a junior in college, and another one who's going to be graduating this year from homeschool. So I'm almost done. I can't believe how quickly the time flies. And just to give you an idea of how effective I have found some of the things that I've been working with my kids, and also with the kids in the classroom that I work with. One son actually tested out of freshman college English. They gave him 4 credits and sent him on his way. And then I'm not sure about the other one, if he's going to be testing out of it, but at this point he is over the 90th percentile in reading and English on the ACT. So I know that for a fact one is a natural kind of language person, even though he didn't show any interest at all in reading until he was starting 2nd grade. And the other one, math is more his forte, and we also ended up using some of Diane Craft's materials and techniques with her brain integration therapy for dyslexia and some signs of dysgraphia. And I fully endorse using her brain integration therapy if you find that you have some challenges that you want to try to make the most of any of your students' abilities. Look at dianecraft.org, and I attended a number of her workshops over the years, and I feel like after I walk out of there I have some sort of a degree in neuroscience. So I have seen her techniques work with one of my sons, and he is now excelling, and also combining her techniques that we used when he was little, along with everything that I've been trying in the classroom over all of these years. I can tell a big difference not only in my kids but also in my students and my classes. At the beginning of the year I get a writing sample from them, and I hold on to it because I know that I'll probably not see it again if I turn it back to them at the end of the year. At the very end of the year I return it back to them with their last writing assignment, so that they can take a look at what they were doing at the very beginning of the year and compare it to what they've done at the end of the year. And I would say at least 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, you can see a big difference in their writing. So I really do stand by the techniques that I have been using, only because I have done a lot of trial and error with a lot of programs out there, and I have tried to take the best out of all of the different programs that I've used over the years and come up with something in the middle. Some of them are very formulaic and structured, and some of them are very kind of loose and very creative and flowing. And I've tried them all, and I've kind of come up with something that is in the middle of very structured and very flowing. And I use that in my instruction, and I have found that it really has been effective. So I hope that what I share with you today is going to be very helpful and effective as well. There are 3 areas of English language arts that you want to focus on during the years in middle school and high school, and that is grammar, writing, and literature. Vocabulary comes from the literature, and if you still have some areas of spelling that your child is struggling with, I encourage you to look at phonics-based spelling programs or workbooks in order to work with issues in spelling, and also a program that incorporates, some basic spelling rules. I do have a workshop with the convention called Developing Language Skills, and I go into that a little bit more detailed with some techniques. I encourage you that if you do have a middle schooler who's still struggling in English and language arts, that you might want to back it up a step and listen to that workshop, Developing Language Skills in Elementary Ages, because I really have set a lot of the foundation down in that workshop of what needs to take place before you move on to these higher skills in middle and high school English. So you'll want to take advantage of that workshop. So I don't teach grammar specifically separate out of the grammar textbook, and I don't do diagramming. And I do have a degree in English and a degree in secondary education. And I know that sounds kind of weird coming from an English teacher, but I found that when I was teaching diagramming that the kids were so focused on just learning how to diagram and where to draw this line and where does that line go and, where does this word go, that they were losing focus on the whole purpose of diagramming, which is trying to figure out which words are modifying or describing or go together in the diagram. So I found that a more effective and direct way to address grammar was to tie it into their writing and look at sentences and label sentences with different parts of speech, talk about what each word is doing in the sentence, how do they relate to one another, maybe draw an arrow from an adjective to a noun that it's describing, maybe an article like the to the noun that the articles it's describing, labeling it with, ART for article, ADJ for adjective, ADV for verb, and drawing, adverb, drawing an arrow from that adverb to the verb it's describing. So I think that they more directly see the relationship of how these words work together when you keep them all in a sentence, as opposed to breaking it up and learning how to diagram. That's what I have found. If you are a strong proponent for diagramming and you have found it effective in your homeschool, by all means, continue doing that. But with the number of kids, different kinds of learning styles and so forth, I have just found that this seems to be a more direct route for me to go. In grammar, you're going to be looking at more detailed uses of the parts of speech and sentences as opposed to elementary school. And again, I described this in the other workshop for developing language skills. The verbs of being, you don't just identify them. You also look at how are they being used. Is it being used as a helping verb? Is it being used as a transitive or an intransitive? And then with the transitive, you would get into the direct object, indirect object. Then uses of adjectives and adverbs are more complex than just simply describing a noun or simply describing a verb. And then different phrases and clauses. I don't get into a lot of phrases and clauses until middle and high school, just simply because in elementary, you're still trying to just put together the basic structure of a sentence. and adding the adjectives and adverbs and things just to add some more detail to the sentences. Then I go into more detailed punctuation rules, especially when it comes to commas, because commas tend to be the one rule that in punctuation that most people, adults included, will follow a rule called, well, I felt like there just needed to be a comma there. And when people in my class, kids in my class, including any parents that sit in, I tell them that rule is not allowed in my classroom, and that we cannot follow the rule of, well, it just kind of seemed like there should be one there. And we start actually looking at the rules for when to put a comma in a sentence. And whenever students in my class put a comma in a sentence, they have to tell me what rule are they following. They have to be able to tell me why. I have found that we've played relay race games and all kinds of things in order to be able to, explain why, where commas should go and why. And it doesn't have to be real dry and boring. You can come up with some games to practice that. Same thing with semicolons. And when you do the commas and semicolons, I always find that that's the time to work on dependent and independent clauses and what they are, phrases, comma splices, and then you want to also focus on word usage at this age. Subject and verb agreement. Some kids are going to naturally be more language oriented, and they're not going to have an issue with this. Ones that are not language oriented, they're going to have an issue. Even though they may be able to speak it correctly, when they write it, that will show up in their writing. Just a very basic example, the cat is eating his food. Just to show you, subject to verb agreement would be the cat are eating his food. They're not going to speak that way, but a lot of times they won't catch it when they're writing. So that is one thing that you want to focus on. The other one is pronoun and antecedent agreement, which is making sure that the pronoun matches with, the antecedent, such as the boy or he picked up his book, as opposed to he or the boy picked up their book. Again, it sounds, when they say it out loud, they're going to catch themselves, but in their writing, they're not going to. So you need to point that out in their writing. Same thing with dangling modifiers. Those can be fun to go over. And then this is where you're going to practice proofreading and editing and making corrections. I give students a checklist of things that they're going to look at, and we make 3 passes. We call them passes over our first attempt at writing. In the first pass, you're going to maybe read a sentence at a time and then look for certain things like, do they make sense? Do they flow together? That kind of stuff. The second pass, you're going to read one word at a time and make sure it's capitalized or it's spelled right. And then does it make up the whole sentence, as a whole? And then the third pass, you might be looking for making improvements to your sentences, revising word choices, things like that. So I tell them, you're not done after you're finished writing whatever it is you're writing, and you're not done after you just reread it one time. You need to practice editing yourself. Now, as I said, the grammar goes directly into the writing. With the grammar, when things show up in their writing, you want to go ahead and focus on one thing or 2 things at a time that you notice pop up in your child's writing, and that is when you want to review the grammar rule and the concept. And this is where, if anything, I would take out some sort of grammar review book or a textbook or workbook and just focus just on those practice exercises that you see popping up in their writing, as well as the ones that I had mentioned a minute ago, like the word usage and the punctuation rules with commas and semicolons. You want to definitely go over those. Those are the ones that are most common in writing, and also the most common that are not found when a student edits papers. And they do show up if your child is going to be taking a test to get into college. They show up on the ACT and SAT. The proofreading skills, looking for the verb and subject agreement and the dangling modifiers and the commas and the semicolons, they're all going to be on those tests. So if not, you want to be able to improve the child's writing, but you also want to be able to improve their proofreading skills. So you're going to use their writing as a kicking off point to see what else you need to review in their grammar. You then want to move on to, with their writing, as you're building up their writing skills. You also want to incorporate different parts of speech, in adding more detail to their sentences, but then also adding variety to their sentence structure by starting off a sentence with a different part of speech other than subject plus verb. Subject plus verb. That is how people usually write. If they haven't consciously practiced in varying their sentence structure, it's normal for people to start with a subject and then add a verb and then add the rest of the sentence. What we want to do is, after your child has written something, we want them to get into the habit of going back, looking at their sentences and seeing how they can improve them by maybe moving them around and putting an ly word at the beginning, an ing word at the beginning, a preposition at the beginning, a clausal word such as, when, or because at the beginning. This will add some more variety and add some maturity to their writing, and it will be more interesting to read. After your child gets into the habit of, and they should by middle school be writing a proper single paragraph with a topic sentence, 3 detailed supporting sentences, and then a concluding sentence. That would be a proper single paragraph. They need to get into the habit of starting to write multi-paragraphs. And I always say that the best way to get into the habit of knowing the proper structure for a multi-paragraph format is giving them the material to write about first, then moving on to original writing. And the way I do this is using that Charlotte Mason method of, oral narration and written narration, where they're retelling or summarizing a story that, either you've read aloud together or silently on their own. And I pick a short story or a chapter, and then they can retell what happened in that short story or chapter. When I teach co-op classes, I don't have everybody stand up and do oral narration. I have them read a short story as homework, and then they have to retell that short story in their own writing. So I get something on paper, and then we start from there. And it's by no means polished, but it's a jumping off point to go ahead and start discussing how do you edit? How do you reword the sentences and add variety? How do you put in some transition words? Because I do give them a list of transition words they can use. Transition words in the retelling of a story, a narration, are going to be different than a different type of paper. So I'll give them a list of narration transition words they can use so that they can tell me what happened first in the story, then next, and so on. And they get used to the idea of putting in those transition words. Retelling a story and practicing using the transition words, that's the easiest format to practice putting in those transition words, because it comes more naturally to move from one event in a story to the next and using those transition words to tell those events. So that's part of the reason why I choose the retelling. The other thing is you don't get this deer caught in headlights syndrome where someone's afraid to write something on a blank piece of paper because they don't even know where to start. If you give them a short story to read ahead of time and then they have to retell it, you've taken half the work away from them, and they can just focus on actually doing the writing instead of coming up with what to write about. After they can write a proper paragraph and multi-paragraphs, that's when you begin practicing brainstorming ideas on a piece of paper of what they want to write about, and then putting it into an outline so that they can follow the outline as they write their 5-paragraph format. I always tell people to start with a 5-paragraph information essay or an informative essay as your first 5-paragraph essay, because, again, you want to have them pick a topic that they can inform someone about and that they can sit and talk about off the top of their head for 5 minutes without even thinking about it. This way they don't have to research it, they don't have to think about what they're writing about, and they are the authority on that topic. And again, it takes away the, well, what am I going to write about? That's when you practice the brainstorming and then writing an outline. The 5-paragraph format, you have components such as the introductory paragraph, where you talk about different kinds of hooks. You have a topic sentence. Then you talk about either in one statement or 3 separate sentences what are the 3 supporting detailed topics are you going to talk about that relate to your topic sentence? Then you have some sort of a transition sentence leading to your first supporting body paragraph. So then you have 3 supporting body paragraphs, and each one of those paragraphs is some sort of a detailed topic that is related to the whole topic of your paper. So you come up with 3 things you want to talk about. You also put those transition words in the beginnings of those paragraphs so that you're moving from one idea to the next with a transition. And then your last paragraph is your concluding paragraph where you're restating your topic sentence and you're renaming those 3 detailed topics that you just discussed. And then you're closing with a clincher. And there's a few different types of clinchers that you can close with. So after you've written your 5-paragraph paper, and it's this informative paper, and you're relating information about a topic you know about, then you can start moving into more difficult 5-paragraph formats, such as a persuasive essay or an argumentative essay. This is extremely important in high school if you're going to be going into college, because this paper is the kind, or essay is the kind that's on the ACT and the SAT in the writing portion. And this type of paper is used in a number of different subjects that you're going to come across throughout college. It also practices and hones higher order thinking skills and your organization of thoughts, because you have to support whatever topic you're talking about and support the idea that it relates to the prompt that your professor has given you or the prompt from the essay test. Other papers that you want to focus on would be literary analytical, where you're taking quotes out of a novel or a poem, and you're taking those quotes to show, well, this is the way the author used this technique, or this is when the author says that the character was argumentative. You take quotes of what did the author say, how did the author act, to support, your assertion that the character was, let's say, argumentative in the book. Also, you are going to be using quotes for MLA research papers, and your students should have practice writing an MLA research paper, either that or an APA or a Chicago. And the difference between all of them is really having to do with just picky details in how do you cite your citations. What we used to call a bibliography in the back of the paper, it's now called works cited page. And how do you where do you put the comma here? What do you italicize here? Where do you put a period here? In really the bibliographic information. And then the type of paper, MLA, APA, or Chicago, really depends upon the subject of the paper. Also, a compare and contrast is helpful, because you will have professors saying this author in this article says this expert on this topic in this article says that. How are they similar? How are they different? And then you have college application essays. So that's something you'd want to practice, and get ready for as well. Now, for literature, as I said, the vocabulary, which we haven't talked about yet, that comes from the literature in middle school and high school. And in middle school literature, you want to have a general broad cross-section of literature with authors and time periods, of course, at the middle school level. And I've put together a handout, not only an outline of this workshop, but also one that has reading lists, suggestions for middle school and high school. And you want the vocabulary and the sentence structure to be a little bit more challenging than if they were to just pick up a book and sit down and read for fun. They will pick up the vocabulary and the sentence structure from that author's writing, which is why I tend to suggest a number of classical literature authors as opposed to the Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Because most of the modern literature nowadays is written, not all, but most, is written in a very basic sentence structure. You don't have the variety. You have subject, verb. You also have very basic vocabulary that you would hear on a day-to-day basis in regular conversation. So I don't find that a lot of the modern literature is as enriching just on that standpoint. I'm not talking about, the subject matter or, whatever is being discussed. I'm just talking about the actual vocabulary and sentence structure. With the books that, or even, an anthology that your middle school student would be reading, you want to practice answering questions for comprehension and also recall of detail. Whether you do that in writing and give them a list of questions or whether you just discuss it is fine. It's up to you. Story elements such as basic plot elements, meaning the time, the setting, time and place for the setting. Anything as far as plot, meaning what happened first, next, what was the most exciting part, how did it end, what was the ending of the plot. Beginning literary elements such as how is the author describing things, is he using similes, metaphors, any kind of imagery, using the 5 senses, how is he actually trying to convey these pictures, to the reader and setting the mood or the tone of the story. And then you want to include different forms of genre. You want to have fictional novels and short stories with a variety of different themes. Could be survival, wilderness, fantasy, science fiction, nature, different types. You want to just expose them to, allow them the opportunity to explore the different themes and see if, maybe something they never considered before they now enjoy. You also want to look at different forms of literature, poetry, plays, primary nonfiction sources such as essays or speeches, nonfiction biographies or autobiographies. For high school, most states require 4 credits of English for high school graduation for a regular diploma. Some, if it's more of a vocational diploma, will, that 3 is fine. However, colleges usually look for 4 full credits, so that would be 4 full years of English. And it can be the ones that I am suggesting here, or it could even be written on your transcript as English 1, 2, 3, and 4. However, typically, what is included is something like Introduction to Literature, where, again, it's just a general, kind of approach to literature, similar to middle school, but at a higher level for 9th grade. You have American literature, British literature, and as I said, the handouts, I've gotten together certain titles that I've suggested so you can get an idea of what kind of literature I'm talking about for the Introduction to Literature, American versus British, and versus world literature. The 3 typical ones you see are the top 3, and then you can add a year of world literature if you want. Some people study the ancient classic Greek and Roman. Other people do more of a geographical and sequential study, which is what I normally do. I do something from the ancient all the way through the modern times, and I do normally an anthology textbook where it has a bunch of poems, plays, short stories, essays, speeches. It has a cross section. It has excerpts of more challenging pieces of literature, and I do it in a sequential order, but then I also make sure that it is from a broad cross section of geographical areas around the world. You can also offer half-credit classes. So for 1 year, you could have 2 half-credit classes, or you might decide to just study a whole year of poetry or a whole year of short story, or maybe an author study such as a semester of Dickens, or a country or origin study of like Russian literature. Maybe a whole year or a half a year of Shakespeare. Or you could just have something that's explicitly just a writing class. You might want to do a semester of creative writing or a whole year of creative writing, if your child enjoys that. There are a number of programs out there for creative writing. Or you might want to do expository writing for a semester or a whole year and call it writing and composition, or expository writing and composition, something like that. Now, what you want to focus on with the high school literature at this level, you want to look at different levels of thinking skills. You want to not only look at the comprehension, see if they understand it and can recall information, but you want to start analyzing. You started doing that a little bit in middle school, but now you want to get into it deeper. You might want to do a character analysis and find out what is that character saying? How does he act? How do other characters react or say about that character, to develop an analysis of a certain character in a story. Protagonist, antagonist, static or dynamic. Story elements. You want to get in deeper along with the plot. You want to get into use of irony or satire or mood or tone, or what is the theme of the story. With literary devices, you go in deeper, other than maybe, other than similes and metaphors and imagery. You want to look at the use of hyperbole, use of the satire, use of irony, use of onomatopoeia, personification in poetry, which is and in stories like Animal Farm. You have an analogy of the Russian Revolution, but it's animals personified to act like people. So you want to get into deeper analysis. Also, you want to look at appreciation of the literature, almost as though it's a work of art that you're looking at. You want to look at the author's word choice. And how does the author express themselves? What is their writing styles like? What words did they use to come up with that mood or that tone, or the poet with helping to create a picture in your mind of what they were saying? It has to do with appreciating the art of putting words together. And that's one of my favorite topics to look at, because unless you really start appreciating that and noticing it, you don't really fully appreciate poems or appreciate what went into the story. Also making personal connections and drawing conclusions with the story. That helps with the understanding of what that story was about. You want to look at author biographical information and their viewpoint, their growing up years. What time period did they grow up in? Where did they grow up in? Then you begin to understand what influenced their writing style, what influenced the topics they chose to write about, how they wrote about it, their viewpoints. What even the My Captain is a poem that you wouldn't even know that it talked about Abe Lincoln and the Civil War unless you really knew that Walt Whitman wrote it during that time period. So you really do need to do some background information about the writer to really even understand sometimes what they're writing about. And it's kind of fun also to look at the relationships that they had with other authors during that time period and in their geographical area. The other thing with connections to understand is that literature was never written in a vacuum. It was always written influenced that time periods. For instance, Uncle Tom's Cabin. It then influenced what was going on in the time, and it made an impression on people during that time period. So a piece of literature can not only be influenced while it's being written, but it can actually actively influence. You can make connections with literature as a reflection of the culture, philosophy, or religion that that piece of literature is being written about. So you're really kind of learning about what was going on in that time period, what religion was being kind of promoted in that area, what philosophy. There were different literary time periods that were influenced by what was going on, but also how did people believe life should be like. You can tie the literature into history and geography topic areas that you're studying so that you can tie your subject areas together. So if you're studying American literature, you might want to study American history at the same time along with American geography. If you're studying British literature or world literature, you might want to study world history and world geography at the same time. It gives you a greater picture and a greater understanding of what is in that literature. Now, as I said, I have a brand new website I'm so excited about called Katie's Homeschool Cottage. It's at katieshomeschoolcottage.com. I have a blog there where I share not only information like this, but ideas that I had come up with and had done with my own kids in our studies. And I like to share what books we used and what did we do with those books and how did we write about them and what activities we did with them. And I also share, too, what kind of experiences they had during high school that we found beneficial that was outside of classes and that really it really benefited their personal development and all of the wonderful opportunities out there to take advantage of. So I love sharing ideas like that as well. I also have classes that I'm developing, as I said, self-paced and online classes, and I would love, if you would want to take some of those, because as I said, I have tried tons of different programs out there while I was homeschooling these guys, and also helping my husband with his business and stuff. So, and also, different other things going on, with health issues and different family members and so on. I mean, you name it, and y'all have been there. I didn't want to have to write my own stuff, so I was trying all the different programs out there, and so I wanted to come up with something that is something that is done for parents, so that they can feel like they're getting quality instruction to their kids. Their kids are learning what they need to know and making it fun at the same time. So that's why I'm developing these classes to share with everybody, because I wanted to take that burden off of parents. I also have a shop with some ebooks in there where I've put together notebooking ebooks that we've used to help us in our writing, unit studies, nature studies. I also have a unit study Charlotte Mason audio workshop I've put together with all kinds of handouts and slideshows and practical ideas of putting together historical unit studies that bring in literature and writing and how we did it. And I thought I really enjoyed putting that together, because I shared all kinds of things that we did with our kids. So if you have any questions, I know that there's a forum you can ask questions. I encourage you to ask questions in that forum with the convention. Also, you can contact me at katieshomeschoolcottage.com and just ask me a question there. I have a contact like little box you can fill in, and then you can also email me at katieshomeschoolcottage@gmail.com if you have any questions or just want to chat. I always love sharing ideas and brainstorming with other homeschoolers. So thanks again for joining me, and I encourage you to look at the Developing Language Skills in Elementary Ages workshop if you want to go back and look at the foundations that I established with my kids and other kids to help them get to the middle and high school levels, because those were very beneficial steps, and I really encourage you to incorporate some of those even if your kids are already in middle and high school, because it'll only make their foundation more firm in their writing and reading comprehension. So thanks again, and have a great brand new school year.